topic for today is employment, a year in review. So some of you will know, if you follow the social media that YES works with, and some of the communications and content that we put out, a big focus for us is on the term youth employability as opposed to youth unemployment. The idea there is we're really trying to build programs where youth are able to be absorbed into new programs and ultimately go and create an ecosystem that talks employability rather than promulgating the topic of unemployment. So really looking forward to engaging with you, and I think today is going to be quite interesting in that it allows you to talk about broader youth unemployment in the country, but also some of the initiatives that are out there in terms of tackling youth employability. So really just a quick summary of what YES is. A number of people often say, what is YES's role in the broader ecosystem? YES provides a 12-month quality work experience to unemployed youth to reignite South Africa's economy. YES gives youth their first work opportunity. So for those who are not familiar with the legislation, YES is not a learnership, it's not an internship. The intent behind YES is to give youth access to that first job and that important social capital that comes with working and being able to build out your professional network, your professional skills, and ultimately be able to be absorbed into the broader workplace. One of the key figures that we track is absorption, and one of the nice stats that we regularly put out is experience on a CV and reference letter triples the likelihood of a callback within 3 months of a job search. A reference letter doubles the chances of employment for women, and in that case, YES will reward companies who invest in youth jobs with triple BE level ups on their scorecard. I'm not going to get too much into the legislation. Looking at the audience, a number of you are very familiar with the legislation. Happy to go and field some questions in the broader Q&A section, but looking forward to engaging with you around that if you have questions around the technical implementation of YES. So really, this is the experience trap that many South Africans find themselves in. I can't get a job without experience. I can't get experience without a job. We have such nice stories that have been coming through. And I think that when you start thinking about the emotional strain that COVID has put on the psyche of South Africans, and then you go and you look at some of these youth employment opportunities that we've created over the last 12 months, there really is some exciting things to be proud of. We see situations where youth are suddenly given just a little bit of an opportunity to break into the marketplace and are able to go and thrive within organizations. I see some of our YES implementation partners are on this call today, and they've been very successful in being able to build those pathways for the youth in terms of making their permanent employment opportunities. So really, this is just a quick overview of the agenda. We're going to be doing a welcome, which I've just run through, the impact to date, and then we're going to be introducing the new leadership team at YES, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the YES implementation partner model, and then talking a little bit around incentives in job creation as part of the broader ecosystem in South Africa, and then we will field a Q&A. So really, one of the exciting milestones that we have managed to pass over the last week is the 67,000 job mark. You can see there's a really nice uptick in terms of YES's job creation targets there. What we're quite excited about is if we look at the kind of trends and themes that are coming through, it is clear that the confidence is returning to the market. Organizations don't make a commitment to 12-month work experiences and broader BEE implementation if they don't believe that there's some economic growth on the horizon and that there's the opportunity to actually invest for the future. September and October were record months for YES in terms of new signups. There's clear momentum in the market. A number of organizations have returned for their 3rd and 4th years of participation. And one of the really interesting things, and we probably, for many of you who have followed the YES story, it's one of those metrics that you do start to track. We actually have organizations discussing their 5th years of YES implementation. And the reason we often refer back to this is a lot of people thought of YES as a short-term incentive out of the DTRC. It's clear that organizations are seeing this as an important part of their broader BEE strategy, and it's becoming a consistent part in terms of being able to not only tick the BEE element, but job creation that comes with it. So very excited about that landmark achievement in this year. So really, I think for those of you who have followed the YES story, the question of who is the leadership and who is driving YES has always been a very topical one. I think Tashma Ismail-Saville was one of the pioneers in her space. She brought the legislation into the market and really has done an immense job in the first 2.5 years of YES's operational figures. And then it was time to hand over the mantle to some new leadership. And to start off today, we've got the opportunity to introduce you to the new YES CEO, Ravi Naidoo. Ravi, maybe just a quick opportunity for you to introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you come from? And why are you passionate about youth employment in South Africa?
Thanks very much, Mark, and yeah, good morning to all of you on the webinar. Yeah, and I think maybe that's a good way to start, and I'm glad we have this session, this webinar, quite in the first couple of weeks of me being here. So yeah, I think as this is the first time most of you are meeting me in this context anyway, maybe just a few points. I mean, the slide there I think kind of sums it up, but perhaps let me break it down just this once. In terms of what's sort of in that black box, because I think some of that I'm certainly looking to take forward in my relationship, obviously with YES and with all of you on this call. So just in terms of my background, you know, I spent a number of years running the think tank for the labor movement, an organization called Naledi, and working mainly on pension fund reforms, you know, how the worker funds can put their hundreds of billions into corporates and the stock exchange, and how to get that sort of SRI, so social responsible investment programs going, and quite a bit of work on social security reforms, things like skills development, what to do with unemployment, and a number of programs there. And then, you know, having spent all those about 10 years with the labor movement, but then I went to the public sector, where I ran a division of the DTI. Again, that's quite interesting given, you know, the role of YES, of course. And then as a group executive with the Development Bank, DBSA, and I was very privileged to have the opportunity to establish the Green Fund, which has supported a lot of local programs, and which have borne fruit now if you look at renewables and localization content and a number of other impact programs. And then just to complete the holy trinity of social dialogue stakeholders, I've spent the last few years in the private sector and essentially working on establishing SME funding programs and things that fall generally within your ESD space. But again, you know, working with the jobs fund, how to promote employment and employability, as Mark was saying, and so on. So the fact that I've worked across all the different stakeholders who are key to social dialogue and key to resolving the issue of youth employability. So I'm hoping to take that same understanding, the different perspectives, into a collaborative partnership model. So I'll be very interested to engage with all of you following this call. And yeah, so I think that's, you know, I think any institution that is keen to, you know, promote a lasting impact in South Africa, you know, I think by my instinct is to really look at how we can accommodate you and really build partnerships that are viable and worthwhile in that. So I think that's just a way of background. And perhaps, Mark, what I'll do is I'll also just go through the next couple of slides where I will do a bit of the update. You'll have to give me some, cut me some slack here, because I'm just going to touch on the high level points. Mark will obviously deal with the detail, but I want to imbue in maybe the review of these points some of my own take on it. So that's kind of an extended intro, which kind of makes sense. So when I look at the Youth Employment Service Program, there's, you know, these things jump out, and I'll just highlight it. So 67,200 youth work experiences created. I can tell you, when I looked at these figures a couple of days ago, it was a few hundred people less. So in that time, these are additional experiences there, all 12-month quality experiences. So, and from what I've seen, I don't think there is a bigger direct jobs impact program in South Africa than this. And we'll come later on to, well, how much more needs to be done. But I think one must just give credit where credit's due. You know, YES, working with many of you on this webinar has actually had a bigger direct impact on jobs than you'd find elsewhere. So I think that's a very good thing. to take stock of. The second thing that I think is very important is that these work experiences are verified, because obviously people can say many things and you'll come across numbers all over, but if they're not verified, then you really have to treat them with a very heavy pinch of salt. So I think the verification part is also very important. Then on the slide, the next thing that I think is very valuable, and in our partnership, how we take it forward, is 1,700 partner companies signups, of which most of them are very active, and 3/4 of them are large cap companies. So your larger companies, again, that's a very valuable network when you want to have an impact on jobs. So I think that's something that one must appreciate. And I think just looking at the amount of money that has been injected into the economy, local areas, and youth jobs, obviously that's important as well. Then on the retention side, and it's 32 to 42%, that's actually quite a high number. So if you look at other programs dealing with youth and how many of them then stay in that company or in something similar, that's a very high number. Now, obviously it varies, so you'd get some that are a bit lower. I met an IP yesterday, which was close to 90%. So clearly the more retention, the better, and that's something we want to work on and support those partners and those programs that can deliver more on the retention side. But it's a very good number against which to build. And if I look at the last number there, the renewal rate, corporates who have renewed at 58%, and I think, Mark, you were mentioning some of them are in the 4th program and maybe in also planning for the ones beyond that. You know, if you follow the money, I think that's great. I mean, 58% is a very high retention rate. And even though all of these, you want to obviously look at how you can improve on that, I think it's a very good base from which to begin. So if we go to the next slide, you know, the thing then that I am thinking about and the team is being engaged with and is, yes, but the problem is much, much bigger, right? We know, so we had engagement with the president recently, in fact, the week before I joined, and we were looking at what to do with the big number, right? Because obviously we are looking at extreme levels of youth unemployment in South Africa, between 64% and 74% if you're looking at age groups 15 to 24. So that's very, very high. Now, we know that these are structural issues largely, right? They are long-running problems, and the causes are quite complex, right? And so I think, Mark, maybe we can just move on to the next slide. Is that, yeah, because I'm just taking this at a high level. Mark will deal with more of the details, I'm sure, as we go. But I suppose the point of this is that to deal with the many millions who are unemployed is really a long-term solution, and it's a multi-stakeholder approach. So they'll have to look at things such as what's happening in education, what's happening in the labor market, economic growth, and so on. Those things are obviously bigger questions, but we are having to look at what do we do right here, right now. So I think one must understand the numbers that are being achieved now in direct employment in the context of, while those bigger problems are being solved, things have to happen right now. So I think that's very important. And so in terms of what we'd want to look at doing with all of you going forward, clearly there's a legislated mandate on the BEE level ups, and Mark has mentioned it, and we'll talk more to that, where, you know, obviously to the extent companies are working with us and achieving targets, they can be a level up 1 or 2. And I think in the earlier slide, we looked at about 650 companies that achieved a BEE level up. So that's good. But, you know, more than that, there's also the issue of, even if you're not really driven by BEE as an imperative, every company has to be a positive ESG company. I think that's just a global requirement more and more in terms of, you know, attracting investment just for your normal business. And a big part of that is the Sustainable Development Goals. And the jobs part of it is definitely, as you would know, the S of ESG, right? The environment, social governance. So that's the S. But if you think about it, the person is a young person employed, great, there's an impact. But if they're also working, let's say in green economy, or in health or in education, there's a different SDG for that. So you could achieve multiple SDG hits through this program as well. So the one thing we're looking at is how to also enhance the SDG value from this program, because I do notice a number of young people are going into SDG relevant jobs, and that's really a good thing. And that's why the slide, the cover slide for this was really looking at high impact jobs. So the more we can get high impact jobs, obviously, that's better. Now, the final thing perhaps just to say is on the bigger issues, and that's another area of collaboration with yourselves, is, we have a channel into trying to resolve the bigger structural issues affecting corporates, communities, youth employability, and so on. And in that process, we are part of the Presidential Project Management Office on Youth Employment, and there's a number of initiatives that I mentioned at the bottom of the slide. We'll be very keen to also take your suggestions and proposals and work with those of you who have an interest in cracking that nut, forward. So I think that's another area I'll be very interested to engage with you as time goes on. So I probably said quite a bit there, but the approach is really one of collaboration and co-creation with yourselves. And by virtue of the fact that you've all made time to be on this call, we can safely assume that you are on board, and we'll want to then work with you as to how to create a bigger and more lasting impact. So thanks very much for your attention. And Mark, I'll hand back to you now. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Ravi. Much appreciated. And I think maybe if I can just echo some of the sentiments around the SDGs and just some of the discussions that we're currently having with clients. I think when a lot of organizations initially looked at YES, it was a great incentive. It's probably one of the best adopted incentives that's come out of the DTRC in many years. And in terms of its impact, its flexibility, its ease of application and implementation. But what's really nice to see is the way that organizations are now shifting away from simply saying this is a BEE compliance issue into something broader around what are the impacts on communities. So, we're doing some interesting work with some of the mining houses at the moment. They're trying to see how do they integrate it with their SLPs. Doing some very, and particularly because the mining companies themselves are going through a very good phase at the moment, the reality is that that boom won't last forever, and they're taking this decision to how do they empower the community, whether it is through community healthcare work, whether it's sanitary pad manufacturing, whether it is teaching assistants, conservation projects. We've been working on some very exciting conservation projects. There's so many interesting ways to be able to go and activate the community and make it more sustainable, to uplift not just the organization at a social level, but also their broader community. And I think that that's really encouraging to see the type of discussions that we're starting to have with organizations and the different levers that we're able to pull on. I mean, yes, we've got the traditional level up offering out of YES, but we've also done a big equity equivalent investment program this year incorporating YES. So there's a number of ways that you can actually use a combination of legislation and policy to tie in with these other elements on your scorecard. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly run you through a quick reminder of some of the YES value offering. As I mentioned right up front, there is going to be an opportunity to do question and answer. So if you've got any questions you'd like to submit to Ravi, myself, or Nadia, who's the third guest on this webinar, please feel free to submit, and we'll definitely be keen to engage with you on that. Right, so let's just jump to the next slide here. And this is just a quick, Ravi mentioned the number of organizations that are participating. Yes, you can see a number of names across a variety of different sectors, and a lot of them are multinationals. There's mining, there's financial services, technology, and we're really excited about the broad base of it. It's not just something that's been adopted by a single sector, but rather been pushed out across multiple sectors. And it says, there's always, I always talk about this halo effect around YES, is the opportunity to engage with something that is brought together the private sector, public sector, organized labor, and a number of problem solvers who actually want to tackle this youth employment or youth employability challenge in the country. Just a reminder of the formula of how YES works. For a generic entity, you will take you'll calculate your YES target at the start of your measurement period. You'll take your 3-year average net profit after tax times by 1.5% divided by 55,000. You've got 3 options out of that. You can have 1 level up on your scorecard. You can have 1 level plus 3 bonus points, or 2 full levels on your scorecard. And that's one that really, a lot of people often ask me, is it true that you can actually get 2 full levels on your scorecard? Absolutely. It's been done and it's been well documented, and you've seen the number of level ups that have been awarded. Really, what does YES bring you? Brings fresh new ideas and skills into your business, allows you to try out YES cohorts and select the best fits. Possibly you're looking to segue them into things like enterprise and supplier development initiatives or other youth programs that you've got. What's quite nice is there's a lot of focus on kind of capacitating ESD beneficiaries, suppliers, customers, etc. So lots of interesting ways that you can utilize YES to capacitate SMEs and entrepreneurs that are out there. And we always talk about this concept of broadening the tax base through the creation of future capacity and taxpayers for South Africa, and really become an economic driver, not just because you've created a job, but because you've actually been able to create that multiplier effect into the broader economy. Quick couple of overviews around the YES implementation partner model. So there's a couple of things that you should be aware of. You can have youth hosted inside of your own organization. So in other words, they're directly employed by you. You can make use of the vetted YES implementation partners. So what's quite nice about the implementation partner model is for organizations that don't have the ability to host youth inside their own organization, they can be placed in one of 31 vetted YES implementation partners. These implementation partners are across a variety of different fields, but in a nutshell, they become the quasi-employer for the 12-month work experience. They specialize in a number of fields, but just at a technical level, one of the reasons that YES is very popular is that if you make use of the implementation partner model, the youth do not have to appear on your payroll or on your as a direct employee. It allows you, for organizations that have things like headcount freezes, the opportunity to still participate in YES without necessarily breaching some of their internal controls there. And lastly, people often forget this, and it is the end of the year, so I'm going to implore you to take a note of this. YES is a not-for-profit company, but also a PBO, and is able to offer Section 18A certificates. We've had some very generous donations this year, but if you are looking for Section 18 donation certificates, please engage with YES. Typically, these funds are used for the creation of youth work experiences or capacitating the YES hubs that are out there at the moment. I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of some of the fields that are touched with the YES implementation partners. So you're looking at digital, health, finance, education, manufacturing, marketing, and conservation. And we've created some really high impact projects across all of those fields over the last 12 to 18 months, even despite the challenges presented by COVID-19. I've touched on this quickly, but the YES turnkey model using implementation partners is cost effective, less admin, more impact, building capacity in the heart of communities. So, often if you think about the structural setup of the South African economy, a lot of the money sits inside Johannesburg or Sandton and the Cape Town, Western Cape. This allows for money to flow into communities where these jobs have a very significant impact. I was actually in Limpopo about 3 weeks ago at the Jane First community, and through a single sponsor, I think they were bringing in just over 700,000 Rand a month into that community in Limpopo. And you can start to think of the multiplier effect for a place where the youth unemployment sits at nearly 70% odd. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to our third speaker. So as Ravi mentioned, there are a number of broader elements that are involved in job creation in South Africa. And our third speaker today is Nadia Rawjee from Uzenzele. She's one of the consultants that advises around broader DTRC incentives. She's going to be talking a little bit about what else is out there. She's been involved in some discussions around how you could utilize a combination of the Jobs Fund and YES as an example for higher impact projects. With that, Nadia, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'll jump to your video when you are ready for it, but I don't know if you want to quickly give a quick introduction to who you are.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. Yes, and thanks for that introduction, and it's always great to see how far YES has come over the years. And in our relationship with YES, it's great where we look at different incentives and how they all fit together really. And I hope to bring some of that to today's discussion. But as Uzenzele, my name is Nadia Rawjee, and I'm a co-founder of Uzenzele with my sister Zara. We access funding through various grants and incentives within the economy, primarily focused on the DTIC. And as the Jobs Fund is now back in action, certainly looking at the Jobs Fund applications that are coming through, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Really, there's a 100 billion Rand employment stimulus program that's been put in place by the presidency. And what we see typically is that where a program or a stimulus package is announced, there's a relatively lengthy period between that announcement and when jobs are actually deployed into market. But in terms of accessing that funding, etc., it's really quite a niche role, and we play that role as advisors and facilitate access to those grants and incentives. And we've been doing this since 2010. We access funding through over 40 DFIs and funds that are available in South Africa, and have been appointed by our peers as industry leaders. I sit as the chairperson for the professional body of consultants that access the various incentives and grants. And I find that the best way for us to sort of get to a very important point is that the money is available, it can be deployed, and it does work. And Mark, this is where I'm going to ask you to roll into the video that we've got of a testimonial of a client of ours who had raised over 100 million Rand. I'm not going to give you the actual number, over 100 million Rand for their project. We started with this client in 2018, started the project with him at the beginning of the year, helped him through developing his full application and facilitated it through to the DTIC. And this year, his project is up, it's running, it's operational, there are jobs in the market, and he's starting to sell product now this quarter. So Mark, if I could just ask you to quickly, it's a 30-seconder, and we can take it from there. Mark, I'm not hearing any audio.
So now let me just check if the audio is coming through.
Uzenzele Holdings, Zara and Nadia Rawjee, another manufacturing concern. We are proud to be associated with them as they have assisted us with the Black Industrialist grant as well as the IDC counter funding. We thank you.
So Fahim Khan and his family started this manufacturing facility that you saw in the background when we came into, thanks Mark, when we came into their family business, they were in construction, and they had identified roof tiles as an opportunity to backward integrate, and we've helped them through that process. They now have this factory up and running and are employing individuals. And so this really comes to the next slide, Mark, where as Uzenzele, our target is to support up to 25 projects in 2022, to prepare those projects in the industrial sector and through the Jobs Fund. So by doing so, creating 4,500 jobs. We spoke about the timing. So next year, we hope to prepare those applications, submit those applications to the DTIC and to the Jobs Fund. And then it would likely be a 1 to 2 year lag as those jobs come into the market. But we are really, really excited for this opportunity. And with the audience in mind and some of the conversation that was had earlier around SDG, some of the things I'd like to pop into your minds is really around, from an industrial perspective, thinking around your waste and the circular economy. utilizing the IDC and DTI incentives to access that funding. And from a YES perspective through Jobs Fund, looking at collaboration with implementation partners and YES to execute on Jobs Fund applications. And we'll go through a little bit of that detail in a bit, but just coming back again to some of the numbers. SONA 2021, the presidency announced the 100 billion rand that's available for employment stimulus. It's expected to create 800,000 jobs. And 11 billion has been specifically allocated for the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative. The Jobs Fund and IDC have started calls for proposals in November of this year. Timelines were really tight. The IDC minimum requirement in terms of jobs to be created per applicant is 1,000, and the Jobs Fund had a minimum of 3,000 jobs per application. And there was really less than a month to submit. The closing date is the 25th of November. But what's really nice about this is that we're seeing the Jobs Fund had been quiet for a number of years as it was restructuring and being allocated additional funds, is now back in action. And again, to the audience, to implementation partners, to corporates, to verification agents, there is the opportunity to look at the Jobs Fund going forward. We're expecting some new rounds to be coming out next year for Jobs Fund, and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. But there's also 6 billion rand per annum that's available through the DTIC, specifically for industrialization and infrastructure that supports industrialization. So we talk about mining. If mines are looking to expand their productive capacity, they may require additional electricity and power. We know that that's certainly a problem. Allocation of power for large-scale infrastructure programs and capital programs is necessary, and the DTIC has up to 50 million rand available for that. And through that, it creates additional availability to power so that a mine, for example, is able to create additional jobs. From an industrialization perspective, we look at various sectors. Whilst there's the Black Industrialist, which requires a majority Black ownership and management control component, there are other incentives that are available for example, the automotive sector, for agro-processing, for call centers. So that's the item 2 there on the last bullet point, so 4.2. Services that are exported from South Africa, both unskilled and highly skilled jobs. We're currently seeing that there's the opportunity to export skills like financial skills, like architectural skills, industrial engineering skills to the first world. And there are incentives that support all of this through the DTIC. So Mark, over to the next slide then. And some detail then around both Jobs Fund and the DTI is what we're going to go through next. So the Jobs Fund was established by National Treasury in June 2011 as a challenge fund. So what that means is that everyone that applies to the Jobs Fund must compete for the funding that it receives. And the primary component around the competition is around the cost for a job. And the type of project that is being deployed into the market, the track record that's available, etc. Now, a very important component in all grant funding is matching. And on the side, in the last green column, you would see in the second paragraph, it refers to a matching ratio of 1-to-1 or higher. And this really then comes down to if Jobs Fund is putting a rand, they expect you to put in a rand or more. And the or more is where the competitive advantage does come in. And the benefit of utilizing a Jobs Fund grant is that you could really create a lot of scale to projects. The current round that is available, and as I say, it's a really tight timeline, 25th, which is next week, is the deadline, requires 3,000 youth jobs to be committed to by the applicant. What that would require is various levels of selection, identification, appointment of those youth, It requires management of stipends, of monitoring and evaluation, which is quite heavy. And generally speaking, within the Jobs Fund, the monitoring and evaluation and the ability to demonstrate impact is really high. And this is where we see affiliation with the YES program being fantastic, because one, you've got implementation partners who are able to work with the YES program to deploy the jobs, to make sure that they're quality jobs in the market, quality experience. And then YES also has the capabilities of managing stipends and monitoring and evaluation components, which often as an individual project, those costs can become quite cumbersome. So we're hoping that over the next year, we may be looking at how to bring projects together under the Jobs Fund in collaboration with YES and Uzenzele and make things really happen. You know, our 4,500 target might be well exceeded with everyone's support and collaboration. What is expected is that there are some new rounds that will come out that are more in line with the old Jobs Fund types, which are enterprise development, job seekers support, infrastructure support, and capacity building. So really over the next few months, our intention is to work with a number of businesses and implementation partners in concept development so that the concepts are ready for application. Very importantly, the Jobs Fund works in windows, which means when a window opens and closes, there's a hard start and stop dates, and they generally are quite tight, a month or two at most. And there is a really large amount of work to be done in that period. And if there isn't, planning ahead of time, a lot of applicants find that there simply isn't enough time to then create collaboration agreements and really create the kind of scale that could be seen. And we've actually had a number of conversations over the past month for those who wanted to potentially apply for this round coming up, the one that's due for the 25th. And it was simply impossible for them to mobilize from a governance perspective, the collaboration agreements, etc. So I do implore that if anyone would want to make use of the Jobs Fund going forward, that good planning is taken into consideration so that we can create the impact in jobs that we would like to see. Mark, I think we can go on to the next, which is the DTI incentives. And the DTI incentives would typically work within your value chains, and where we look at, for example, a production facility that may be able to convert your waste into a final product, or to have a supplier in your supply chain empowered and really have them able to scale their production facility to meet your requirements. Looking at these numbers, this was a report that was delivered by the DTIC to Parliament on the 9th of November. And as you can see, 8.8 billion Rand was approved. And the jobs to be created is 18,000 jobs. It's not a small amount. And as you've seen with the video, the money does get into the hands of real businesses and factories do go up. So it's really starting to understand how do you utilize the different incentives available in collaboration with YES, in collaboration with your enterprise and supply development requirements, your socioeconomic development requirements, and how do you make this really, provide expansive wins and impact into the economy. So I think what is really important here as well is, again, matching is a concept within the DTIC and can range anywhere from 10% to 50% from DTI and the balance from the applicant. Each incentive that is available through the DTI is unique, has stringent mandates, has very strict guidelines, and it's really important to understand what those guidelines are, to work with individuals who do know how to access that funding and structure your applications in a way that will be winning applications. The other really important component is that there's a misconception around project sizing. So we talk around a lot of, grant funding being quite small in nature. The average over here, based on these numbers, is 12 million Rand average per project. At Uzenzele, our average is 53 million Rand. So we certainly aren't talking about very small projects. We're talking about large capital projects that have sustainable opportunities to create and maintain jobs over a long period of time. What we also see is a major need in the market is collaboration with corporates around understanding where offtake might come from, so that these projects can be viable, which is a critical component for any DTIC application, because with the matching component, you must be able to show viability in order to access debt and equity from other providers such as the IDC or even commercial funders in order to capitalize a project. So I think that goes into really our next slide then, Mark, around the hurdles that we see a lot of applicants go through. And we've engaged with over 2,000 businesses since 2010 in various sectors. All have similar challenges. First of all is a lack of time and availability of the applicant. An applicant's typically very involved in their business, even where they do have strong financial management teams, CFOs, FDs. The intricacies of these different incentives can get away from the teams that are involved, and it's important to have the right resources, which is point 2 there, access to up-to-date information, know-how and best practice, as well as relationships and experience with the funds and individuals in those institutions. And what we found here is that one of the biggest challenges is access to up-to-date information. As things change within the institutions, those who are close to those changes, such as ourselves, are able to know what is not published in the public domain, and are able to advise our clients appropriately. Another area of concern that we've seen is that whilst big corporates may have budgets for professional fees, most of the SMEs that we service would still be in, let's call it, the 50 million turnover to 200 million turnover type range, struggle to have professional fees available for the kind of services that are required, which is where as Uzenzele we come in. We do take contingency risk on our projects so that it's a partnership model, but some still don't have the kind of fees that are required in order to prepare a full project. And when I say prepare, it's not only our fees, it's also engineers that need to be put in place. Their design works need to be approved and need to be bankable. Market studies need to be developed. And depending on the strength of the applicant, they may or may not have availability to the cash flows for those fees. And this is again where we see there might be good opportunities to work and collaborate together in being able to support the 25 projects and 4,500 jobs that we're looking to create. So Mark, that's my bit. And I think just in terms of engagement with us, we are on LinkedIn, where we have a website, and you can reach out to us on inquiry, or you can reach out to Mark as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you very much for your time and sharing this with us. And I think this is what we really get excited is it's almost a YES 2.0, if you'd like, is that the opportunity to move beyond simply, compliance with a YES level up, but also to start looking at projects that are being built. And, I think that there is it really has reached a very exciting phase in the development of YES, in that we are starting to have these engagements. We're building the capacity, we're building the partnerships, we're building the professional networks that will allow us to kind of take it to a whole new level. And, when you start seeing kind of 18, 20,000 jobs being created, Ravi's made the point about, 67,000 is a big number. If the incentive had been around earlier, what would have been that economic impact on the broader community? If we can get a bit of a combination of standard YES, but also broader projects, I think we've got a fantastic opportunity to be an absolute catalyst for youth employability going forward. With that, I'm going to invite you, I'm just cognizant of time, but I am going to invite the audience to submit some questions to us and be able to put it either to myself, Ravi, or Nadia, and let's see if we can field some of your questions. I'll try and consolidate where the questions are similar or overlapping, but by all means, send us a question either in the chat facility or in the Q&A facility. I'll give you a minute or two to type it up, and then we'll start dealing with them one by one. Ravi, maybe as a starting point, just looking at your comment in the chat function, do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about the comment around brain drain and the impact on the economy? And then I'll field the broader questions. I can see there has been discussion there. Maybe if you just touch on what you were the point you were trying to get across there, and then I will move into the next questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. There was a question or comment from Vishal Harichandru, who's asking about brain drain and the impact it might have on jobs and YES and so on. So I was just responding and just saying that obviously for South Africa as a whole, the more brain drain there is, that's obviously a negative for the economy. I mean, for reasons I don't need to go into, but for a company in particular, what that means is if they lose skilled people, then it becomes harder for them to supervise their line managers, and then you have fewer line managers, and fewer line managers supervisors means you can accommodate fewer people at the entry level, obviously. So it has a kind of a domino effect down the line that makes it harder. And one of the things in which we would be doing as YES, because that was a question, what would we do is, some of the things you mentioned with implementation partners, Mark, is that, a focus is how to help the companies, and I think Nadia mentioned as well, to actually implement programs. So, turnkey solutions, bringing in project managers, and so on is one of the things that would help. But for the country as a whole, obviously you want to reduce the amount of skills leaving, and that's a discussion in itself. But I know you also need to look at things like how to bring skills into the country. So I know there is a process at the moment, and it's pending now, where Home Affairs produces their skills lists and all of that. I mean, in my humble opinion, much more needs to be done than that. But definitely skills drain and those things do have a knock-on effect on us, and we do ameliorate or mitigate it as much as we can. But yeah, I think it was just a comment saying that there is this thing, what can we do? There's some practical things we can do, which obviously we are now. But I think it's really a collective problem that needs to be dealt with. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Ravi.
Mark, perhaps I can also give an example of something, and Ravi, you hit the nail on the head there. Yes, it's a massive issue, but at the same time, we do have a lot of elder senior citizens, etc., who have an immense amount of experience, who are sitting at home and doing nothing. And what we saw is specifically on the client that we showed the video of, what they did is they brought this old gentleman in who did a skills transfer over the year whilst they were building the plant and directing the plant. They did a full skills transfer from this old Afrikaans gentleman who loves manufacturing tiles to the staff internally. And it's amazing what that does in terms of, also skills transfer internally. And whilst there is a brain drain, I think we also need to start looking at where those opportunities lie and bringing that into action.
Thanks, Nadia. Quick question here. Would the Jobs Fund allocate funds to SOEs or only privately owned companies?
Thanks. So on the state-owned companies, provided that they are sustainable and that the program is appropriately structured, I don't see an issue. It hasn't been specifically excluded as a type of entity that can apply. But perhaps if we can get your details and I can get an answer out of the Jobs Fund for you, I can push it through to Mark.
Follow-up question. Would a business entity receive BBBEE points for jobs created internally but funds sourced externally, in brackets, through the DTIC or jobs fund? I've got a yes answer, but Nadia, I don't know if you want to give a comment there.
So yeah, Mark, I think your answer would be really pertinent. From a DTIC jobs fund and all government funders, the principle is always, around double dipping, just understanding what you're double dipping on. So what's really important is if jobs are being counted in one program, that it needs to be known and addressed in another. I haven't seen anywhere yet where YES allocation of jobs has been specifically pulled into any of the guidelines to say if you are counting jobs in the YES program, you can't count the jobs you're creating at the DTI and then access TTI funding. I haven't seen that. Mark, perhaps you've got an answer further to that, and perhaps it's been brought up.
Yeah. So, I think that when you look at YES, YES is effectively a level up as opposed to straight, to a points recognition system. There's the big concern. So what effectively the DTIC does and not is intended is that they're trying to ensure that there is no double dipping. And John, I'll come to your question as well, because I think it does also come into this discussion as well. In principle, there is so if you look at the way that the YES implementation partner model works, you don't have to necessarily have those youth on your payroll, even directly contracted by you, but provided you can show the flow of funds to the funding of those youth, you would be able to claim the YES recognition on it. In terms of broader B elements, that would need to be reviewed by your verification agency. And John, I'll come to your question in a moment, but I just want to quickly touch on a couple of these other questions just because I'm cognizant of time here. So Cecilia's asked, how does a YES candidate get placed? So our company wants to participate. Can we screen the applicants? So one of the misconceptions around YES is that when an organization starts a YES program, YES then prescribes who is going to come and work in your organization. 98% of the organizations that partner with YES in a direct model are able to handle their own recruiting. So you don't have a candidate that is imposed on you. You can do interesting activations through your staff, through your supply chain. You can find ways to go and find it, but you certainly have full mandate to decide who you are going to be employing in that process. John asked a question, and it's actually an interesting one because it's come up a couple of times in recent weeks, particularly with this discussion around capacitation of ESD beneficiaries. If a YES candidate is deployed into a 51% Black-owned SMME that is part of the sponsoring entity's supply chain, can they claim the cost to company of the candidates toward their supply development claims on their BBBEE scorecard? Our current interpretation at the moment is not. Having said that, what is coming out is that the absorption pathway, so the youth completes their 12-month work experience, and then the absorption pathway is into the enterprise or supplier development beneficiary. That would then, so year one, you claim YES, year two, you claim the supplier development element of it. But it is interesting. We've actually chatted to two of the verification agencies around this and had different answers on it. It is one of the questions I actually have in with the DTIC at the moment. And John, I'm happy to take that offline and give you an update as soon as I get insight around it. One of the opportunities, so let me just catch up here. How does the YES for Youth program do to ensure quality of the work experience for the unemployed youth in an underperforming host? Do you only use the monitoring and evaluation strategy to track the performance, or use the host learning plan and performance scorecard? So this is actually something that's very topical at the moment. And I think for those who followed the YES story, you'll know that this is something that YES has been giving a lot of thought to over the last 18 months and is actually a passion point for Ravi himself. But monitoring and evaluation is going to be a major focus in terms of some of the new initiatives that YES is rolling out. So YES's mandate is to monitor and evaluate the placement of these youth. There's a number of initiatives that are in place, including the YES mobile phone. There's a call center that's doing over 1,800 calls a week to youth situation. And I'll give you a very simple example. We had a situation in KZN middle of last year, end of last year, where an organization where the call center had actually been triggered to go and call a number of youth who had indicated they were unhappy with their work experience. and they were not able. And when we phoned them on the call center, they said, well, they've just been told to sit at home and claim a salary each month. And then at that point, it triggered an internal process inside of YES. And then we got in contact with the sponsoring entity to say this is not the intent behind the quality work experience, and we then dealt with that. There are a number of initiatives that YES is also looking at. You'll probably see some communication going out early next year around some additional functionality that we're building into there, and I'm happy to, and we'll be certainly sharing that as we go along. I'm just cognizant of time. I'm going to try and field these last two questions, but for those who want to have further discussions, you will be able to drop me an email. So one of the questions here, hi Mark, thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the possibility of recognizing tertiary training as part of absorption. A number of IPs have placed YES candidates in schools as teaching assistants. For those candidates to be absorbed and be given more opportunities other than administrators, they need teacher training. Can teacher training and other training that facilitates absorption be recognized as absorption? Under the current legislation, the answer is no, they cannot. Absorption can effectively be done through three mechanisms. One, a permanent employment contract inside of your organization, proof of employment inside of another organization, or the establishment of an enterprise and supplier development beneficiary with the appropriate linked documentation that goes with it. And the idea is to ensure permanent absorption ultimately comes through. Second question is around, the second is a request for the program to recognize that some candidates be offered permanent absorption before the 8-month threshold. Why is absorption only recognized after 8 months? So the answer to that is effectively what they were trying to do is to try and cut out things like labor broking, instances where organizations were using YES to facilitate things like Section 189 processes, labor broking, short-term contracts, in other words, constantly rolling but enjoying the BBBEE benefit. I'm happy to take that discussion offline as well. If you want to pop me an email on mark, M-A-R-C, at yesforyouth.coza, I'll be happy to go and address that as well. I am just cognizant of the time that is coming through that we have, and we'll want to work out. But Dunasani, I just got one last question, which I just want to touch on. What happens when the host company is unable to maintain or improve its BBBEE level? I'm assuming that you're referring to the sponsoring company. The answer there is that if you look at the clarification statement says that the level that needs to be maintained or improved upon is the level obtained in the first year of participation prior to YES recognition. And the 1.5 of the practice note, it does speak to instances where you would be able to have YES, where you would be able to drop a level and get a dispensation from the DTRC. Myself and Tracy can work quite closely, and we're happy to work with you around those things. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am cognizant of time. It is 1 minute past 11. I have missed my deadline by one minute. But really, I just want to take an opportunity to thank you. Ravi, thank you for joining us today. And I'm sure you'll be driving a lot more of this in the coming months and year. And Nadia, thank you for giving up your time.
Thank you very much, Mark, Ravi, and the YES program.